All right, so let's go for our expert session. My name is Bodo Sieber, CEO and co-founder of Tag Marshall. And our session today will talk about the importance of data in driving operational efficiencies. And I've got an expert guest with me, Stephen Borrow, who's director of golf at the famous Bandon Dunes over in Oregon. And I see that we've got a fantastic list of attendees, including some familiar names. Matt Barksdale from Pinehurst is online, and I believe also Sean Smith from Pebble Beach. So they're familiar with us and Tag Marshall. And I know, Stephen, you told me earlier that you've been over to Pinehurst, never got to play, but I'm sure that happens soon. And you met Matt, sorry. So what I'd like to do is just a quick intro into Bandon. Not that Bandon Dunes needs much introduction. Please, won't you just do a quick intro as to what Bandon stands for, what's important to you, how it all started, and also your personal involvement and when you started at Bandon and what your role is.
Okay, certainly. Thanks, Bodo, for the introduction. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Again, my name is Stephen Borrow. I'm the director of golf at Bandon Dunes Golf Resort in Southern Oregon. And Bandon Dunes is one of those unique places in the United States where it is truly links golf, you know, that patch of land that connects the ocean to the mainland. We are very fortunate to have an owner that has developed a facility here that now comprises of 4 championship golf courses, all ranked in the top 20 in the United States in Golf Digest. We are continuing to build upon the mystique that has been created here and that experience by opening our 5th championship course in 2020 called the Sheep Ranch. Many of our guests have played that in the past as kind of a mystical facility where you could go out there and play golf as 1 or 2 groups only per day. It will be incorporated into the resort, and when that happens, we are very fortunate that Bandon Dunes Golf Resort will have 3.2 miles of Pacific coastline as part of our resort property that guests get to experience not only the beautiful golf courses, but the scenery that surrounds that. Additionally, we are very lucky in the fact that over the past 20 years, we have hosted and will host our 7th USGA Championship. In 2020, we will host the U.S. Amateur. So we've got a lot going on this next year. We continue to look at what we can do to, provide opportunities for our guests to have a wonderful golf experience, and certainly Tag Marshall plays a part of that.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks for the intro. So there's certainly a lot of comparison that has been made with the Bandon facilities to some of the traditional and famous Scottish courses, or even Irish, and also the Oregon weather and vegetation. Certainly, let's one draw comparisons. And I see that you've got and Mike Kaiser, certainly with all his vision and risk taking, he had a Scotsman design the course for you, and that was that person's or that designer's very first project. So a lot is to be said for Mr. Kaiser's vision and making Bandon into what is now a household name in golf. And fantastic to have 4 courses in the top 100, and I'm sure that Sheep Ranch will be knocking on that accolades door very soon. Tell us about the name. Was that always in contention, and was it known as Sheep Ranch before it was officially designed and planned?
It was back in I guess right around the early 2000s when Pacific Dunes was being developed. Mr. Kaiser and his business partner from Recycled Paper Greetings, Phil Friedman, purchased this portion of land, and Mr. Doak and Mr. Urbina were asked to go ahead and design some holes over on this complex. And it started off as just 14 green complexes and a routing. And at the time, it was named the Sheep Ranch because at one point in time there had actually been sheep grazing that area and knocking it down from the grass. So even after we had kind of opened it up on a seasonal basis, there were still periods of time where there were active sheep grazing on the facility. I think even the more humorous part of this was that anybody that has been to Bandon and understands the inclement weather that can certainly come in and be a part of that experience, the Sheep Ranch sits out on the most western point of our property, and in the decades ago there used to be a wind farm with windmills that were sitting out there. And what they discovered was that the wind blew too much and it was breaking the windmills, so they did away with all the windmills that existed out there. But it is a great piece of property that will be a wonderful test for golf and a great experience, added to the resort.
Yeah, good luck to the golfers. And so the weather, the wind, the elements is certainly part of the experience. I wonder if the grazing sheep, is that part of the maintenance plan for the facility going forward?
I don't think so. Certainly from Mr. Kaiser's standpoint, no, but from Mr. Friedman's standpoint, every now and then he thinks that we ought to have some sort of a sheep presence that's out there. But we'll see how that shakes out in 2020.
Absolutely. And there's a wonderful club I got to visit an island called Waterville, and they've got um, uh, rabbits and bunnies omnipresent on the course, and every now and then they get seen. So they've made it part of their brand, and so their T markers are all little bunny rabbits, and you can't escape it. So maybe the sheep will be a big part of what happened at Sheep Ranch. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us. I certainly can't wait to come and visit. I know some of our team have over the years. Let's dig into what we want to get through today. And before I start, I would like to do a quick intro on Tag Marshal, because there's many people online where this is their first opportunity to get to know us as a company and how we add value to the golf industry. So a quick outline is we are a software as a service business that optimizes golf operations. We started and had our first customers in the US in 2015. So we've been around the block. This would be our fifth PGA show coming up, or is it number 6 even? We have to date tracked over 10 million rounds of golf, and many of those or some of those at Bandon, and also, like I mentioned, Pebble Beach is on here, and Pinehurst, and many other really great facilities. We've collected 1 billion data points. That is very important to us because we can draw a lot of analysis and data learnings from working across the industry, and we work with over 200 clubs internationally. So in the top, you see a list of some of our more well-known private clubs, including Hazeltine, Valhalla, Eastlake, where we just watched the final of the Tour Championship, and then his Erin Hills was our first US customer back in 2015, and so a similar golf experience to Bandon, not coastal, but certainly has some of the Wisconsin charm about the experience. And we're also partnering with a number of associations and look to add value where we can, and obviously also learn from the best out in the industry, including good people such as Stephen, who's kindly joined us today. So, Stephen, just to jump back on our topic, so we want to look at data, operational efficiencies, and how it can be used to affect savings, and also how it impacts revenue opportunities. So how important is operational efficiencies data to your business at Bandon? So, Stephen, just from a management principle point of view, I know there's a lot of vision in play at Bandon, and obviously has been over the last 20 years and into the future. So in terms of your business goals that you've defined, it certainly sounds like the customer experience is paramount, and that is and was always at the forefront of your thinking, and also informs everything that you do, I would think.
No question. I think, from the very beginning that Mr. Kaiser was reaching out to develop a product like he has, is that the guest experience, or maybe more importantly, the golf experience, was the driving factor. And again, in the United States, where pace of play at a lot of golf facilities has become an issue, he wanted to develop a product that was a walking-only facility where the avid golfer could go out there and walk 18 holes in 4 hours or less, and be able to turn around and play another 18 holes after a good hearty lunch, and get another round in for the afternoon. So that has always been the driving force as far as providing a product where pace is essential to that guest experience, and that is probably one of the key factors that we keep focused on a daily basis as far as how we monitor that satisfaction.
Brilliant. So obviously the course conditioning also key, and you're very blessed there with your design and with your location, but a lot, and it all comes down ultimately to how you present what you have. So I know that from a mobility point of view, it's walking golf. You've got a famous caddy program. So generally, when it comes to management, once you've defined your business goals and you know what's important to you and how you define business success, you want to empower your setup and your staff to be aligned with that. And that goes all the way down to hiring the right people, set up processes to reach those goals, and then action those processes and manage performance. And one of the things that's key is that if you want to manage performance, you need to be able to track performance. You need to be able to measure outcomes, and then obviously keep looking for improvement as well. And that is where data comes into play, because that's really the only way that you can measure and understand, are you on the right track? So in terms of your in terms of the Bandon experience and the Bandon, the touch points that your guests have, I know that generally it's a multi-day engagement, and lots of golf obviously involved, and a lot of time gets spent out on the course. So how would you define the experience and how that tracks into the business goal of obviously providing the best possible and highest customer satisfaction that you have? And then what are the touch points that a player would experience in terms of arrival at Bandon, the starters, how do they brief the players, and then going out and then obviously enjoying themselves out on the course?
Sure. Well, I think when we first began this project here in Bandon, Oregon, it was very low key as far as the servicing that was taking place. As it compared to a Ritz-Carlton type of facility, where there's always somebody there, being able to provide you with, we'll call it white glove service. The nature here was, again, the fact that the golfers came here to experience the golf courses. And so the service here, although it was very genuine and certainly attentive, it was not one of those where you had somebody that was, working for every single need of the golfer. I mean, the players would park in the parking lot, or they would take a shuttle from their facility over to one of the golf courses, and they kind of handled their own clubs and things until they got to the first tee, where they were introduced to the caddies. Certainly, as the notoriety of Bandon has taken place, the service levels have had to increase. The expectations from our guests have increased. And, part of that is then looking at how we, identify that those touch points with our guests, where those take place, and then more importantly, how do we evaluate and measure and monitor those service points. And so before, it was all done with paper and pencil and subjective timing of different staff members. And what we kind of found was that in any of those measurables, if you're a staff member, if you missed 4 or 5 groups maybe from a pace perspective, then you just went and backdated that information, and you maybe yielded that to benefit to your operation as far as what you were hoping to try to get. And so we have added technology over the course of the last number of years here, trying to give us better measuring points and data so that we can understand where our guests are coming from, what their expectations are, and then more importantly, how are we performing in any one of those service touch points that we're looking at. So we've certainly adopted Tag Marshal and some other technologies to help us with that process.
Fantastic. So you're mentioning a few critical factors here. The play experience is a key business goal, pace of play, non-negotiable. That was part of Mr. Kaiser's vision from day one, especially because I suppose he knew that he was up against some critics as well by creating a walking facility. But what's interesting here, that we can confirm, and also the USGA research confirms, is that kart golf is not necessarily quicker. Because as you know, especially if it's a cart path only facility, it actually takes a fair bit of walking back and forth, club selection and so on, that can get in the way of efficient pace. So the traditional walking golf, as it was designed and created and celebrated in Scotland is actually a very efficient way of getting around the course. And you mentioned that you've got a caddy program that's very important to you and very important to the experience too, because the players certainly spend the time with the caddies. So one of the things that is important, and you mentioned that just now, is that you're aligning expectations and you gathering guest data even ahead of the visit, and you've got a lot of repeat visits, obviously. So there's a system that helps you do that. And I'd just like to ask you how that then plays into the actual planning of the round in terms of what time of day do you allocate to a person? Do you get them their preferred caddy if available? And sometimes people don't want to use a caddy because that's how they like to play golf. So how do you take that into consideration when it comes to planning of your day, just so you can ensure that everybody has the experience that they come for, and that you can ensure that the overall experience on a day and in a week and over a month and over the course of the season is as controlled and as free of surprises as possible?
That's a great question, Bodo. Again, when we first started this experiment, the idea was to be able to play golf in 4 hours, and so that was the core golfer that was coming out to Bandon Dunes, was that individual that wanted that experience at an efficient pace. And with, again, the growth and the notoriety of Bandon Dunes Golf Resort, we have certainly attracted, a different clientele on top of that core golfer for us, and whether that's the individual that's checking Bandon Dunes off as a bucket list of, top facilities that they want to play. Again, a lot of these individuals are not used to walking a golf course. They are, members at private clubs or, higher end facilities that they ride in a cart for, the majority of their golfing rounds, or if not all of them. And so one of the things that was very paramount for us was developing a caddy program that would allow the guests to come out, walk without the weight of the clubs or worrying about the clubs on their bag, and then also provide them that caddy experience. That is something, certainly a little bit more unique here in the United States. If you're on the West Coast, certainly the East Coast has a great caddy programs at many of the private clubs, but again, they're a little bit smaller. So, our caddy program will reach upwards of over 300 caddies during the summertime. I think, right now, even as we go into the winter, we're still carrying right around 280, 290 caddies. And many of those caddies have decided to just stay right here at Bandon Dunes and not, migrate from north to south during the different types of seasons. And the caddies are a very important part of that process of not only just the experience, but also helping us maintain our pace of play. They understand, again, positioning. So the idea is to take that additional golfer or that business that we're getting, look at how we can position them on our tee sheets to provide the best experience. So one of the key aspects that we looked at over the last several years was creating what we call our pace setter times. And so for the first hour and a half of each morning, we have tee times that when they are booked, our reservation agents are talking to the guests to try to understand their pace desires. And so those individuals that want to try to get out early in the morning, or at least do that 4 hour or less round, we try to put them in that first hour and a half. Likewise, the other side of that is very clear. If we have somebody that's wanting to book in that pace setter times, the agents are having that conversation and they say, boy, 4 hours is just a little bit too much for us. We're more like a 4:30 golfer or a 4:20 golfer. Then we would recommend that they go to a different portion of the day to where we soften up that pace. And it's very typical of any bell curve process that you see. The idea is that we see that our rounds are much more efficient in the morning. They tend to escalate to a little bit higher pace in the midday, and then they come back down again in the later evening as the golfers are trying to conclude those rounds. So we certainly use the technology and the information that we're getting from different systems that we use to try to align the guest with the appropriate time that they would like to play in, and that's been very beneficial for us.
Nice. I think we'll talk to some data that you're getting out of TagMarshal. You mentioned the bell curve, but I think one of the key learnings is that it's not a one-size-fits-all experience, and that you're actually tailoring your course setup and your play to certain times of players, and then find the best spot for them, just so you can optimize the experience for them. And I suppose your ratings, your rankings, your repeat visits speak to the fact that that's a good strategy. Stephen, let's jump ahead. So which data points do you consider important drivers of efficiencies and quality? And before we go to that, I would just like to broaden the conversation a little bit just for 1 minute. So Tag Marshall was invited to the USGA's Golf Innovation Symposium that was held in March in Tokyo. In Tokyo because of next year's Olympics, where obviously golf will feature again and attract a global audience, which is very exciting, and it's also great for the future and the growth of the game. So the USGA, as part of that Innovation Symposium, which funny enough used to be called the Pace of Play Symposium because it was such a big topic, they have broadened that and they defined a challenge to the industry that goes two ways. One is a 25% reduction in the consumption of key resources because it's increasingly expensive to run operations, labor costs going up, maintenance costs going up, and then irrigation costs going up, and then often those go up at a higher rate than the revenue that a club can attract. So it's important to do that better. And obviously technology can help here. And the other one that's key is a 20% increase in golfer satisfaction. And the golfer experience is absolute key as far as that is concerned. And a 20% increase and a 25% reduction means that we need to know and we need to benchmark because otherwise how do we know that we're on the right track? So there are two factors here that come into play. One is, and that was quoted at that conference, what gets measured gets managed, and if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So that's Peter Drucker, who's a very famous management thinker, and then Rand Jarris from the USGA summarized and said, understanding, benchmarking, developing best practice for continuous improvement are the only way to accomplish these goals. And these goals the industry needs to accomplish. One, we need to run more efficient operations that cost less money to run, and we need to attract golfers and keep them with the game and attract new golfers to the game, and that can only happen by optimizing the player experience. So there's we'll talk to that a little bit more later, but some of the data points that understanding that you need to measure that you are tracking at Bandon and your Bandon courses, Stephen. What are they, and how do you go about getting that data together and having that information available?
Well, certainly with Tag Marshall, I think one of the key things that attracted us to the program was, again, the fact that we certainly believed and knew that our data that we were tracking was very human subjective. And with Tag Marshall, now that subjectivity is out the door because now it's very concrete as far as once the parameters are set up, it documents that information directly for us. So certainly some of the key data points that we look at, again, is that we're looking for, that consistency of our pace. And that is whether it's early in the morning or midday or late in the afternoon, what is that experience that we are providing for our guest? And so, again, things that go along with that, and certainly things that we identified that we were off before using Tag Marshall was, again, maybe our hole-by-hole performance and how long was it taking our guests really to play each of the holes on an 18-hole course. What were the effects of turn stands, either at the turn between the nines or whether those turn stands are out on the golf course, and how does that affect the pace of play? And then certainly one of the things we talked about earlier was just even our weather influence and how much does that impact, pace on any given day. So we're looking at things like that. Are we getting the groups out starting on time? How are they playing the golf holes? What are we looking at as we do that? What are some of those areas that are maybe affecting the pace, and then what are the things that we can do about that? So certainly by having the data points to take a look at and to measure, that gives us critical information that allows us to go back and look at areas of concern and try to help identify solutions for those.
So all of those are key metrics, obviously, around the on-course experience that you're ultimately providing. And would you agree that if you manage all of those well and if you control them as well as possible, that's really what then creates that consistency in the experience, and also gives you opportunity to look for continuous improvement and benchmark and making sure that the operations aligned and working towards that common goal.
No question. I think that we've always defined, different touch points with our guest, where if we are making or having these interactions with our guest, if we are providing them with the service that they are looking for, if we're providing them the pace of play that they're looking for, and then again, those are all the on-course type activities. The golf courses themselves, they are the product that the guests are coming out here and trying to enjoy. And oftentimes, if we can just kind of stay out of the way of that, that experience, then we're pretty successful. But there's no question if they come out here and you can have a beautiful sunny day and you can have the Pacific Ocean staring you at the face on a beautiful golf course, but if you have a 5-hour round, some people are looking to get another round in, or they're just used to a different pace, and so that can affect their enjoyment overall. And so we want to make sure that we're providing a consistent experience for everybody, and that certainly starts with our pace of play.
So it's in our research and also our many conversations that we have with operators such as yourself, it's quite evident that the flow of the course, that there's no wait time, and that it's a good rhythm, is actually more important than what you might consider the pace. So if it's a good flow, that means player happiness. But you mentioned there's a very real influence of how long it takes to play the round on what your guests can do at the resort. And we'll talk a little bit more to the other areas on the resort and as part of the resort experience, and how providing consistent pace frees up time for people a little bit later on. Thanks so much for the outline on these data points and these quality drivers that you're tracking. What I would like to do is now look and get you to talk a bit to the technology and how it actually works in your day-to-day. So here's a very high level outline of how the system works, and maybe you can just take a minute to explain how that has impacted your operation and how it, just the basics. How does it work? How do you use the tags? What does your starter do? How does it influence your caddy program or players that play without caddies and so on?
Sure. I think, again, when guests come here, we have basically, as we've kind of looked at it, maybe 3 types of guests. Those are guests that are going to take caddies as part of their group. There's going to be a group of guests that will not take a caddy but will take a rickshaw as part of it, and then those that will carry their own bag. So our goal is our starter is going to assign a tag to each of the groups. I document who's got that particular tag, and then get them out onto the golf course. Our ranger team, we are in one of those, I guess, positions where we have not been using Tag Marshal per se to look at it from a financial standpoint of, are we able to put more tee times out there based on the time of day. Again, the flow of the course, as you had indicated, Bodo, is very important to us, and so we operate on 10-minute intervals. We try to stick to those intervals and not have guests going off, before or after that 10-minute interval, because we found that creates the best flow of our golf course, and therefore then that experience. So we still rely on a human interaction out on the golf course, especially in the first hour and a half of our day, where we do like to have our guest agents or our ranger team that is out there on the golf course to simply greet and kind of check in after hole number 3 where the guests are and according to their pace. And they are doing well, then simply that is just a greet and hello, you guys are doing great, what a beautiful day, hope you enjoy it. Or it can be just if they're slightly off of that expected pace based on the time of day, there can be just a simple word of encouragement. But more importantly, what that does is it creates hopefully a positive experience between our ranger team and the guest. At least there's an acknowledgement that we do have somebody out there that's kind of looking after them in addition to the tags. But more importantly, what it allows us to do is keep the rest of the day hopefully as undisturbed as possible from the ranger team or having people kind of overseeing that they realize that they're able to watch that now from a computer screen and watching the groups as they migrate around the golf course undisturbed and having an undisturbed experience as part of the Mother Nature of Bandon Dunes. And so our team is, we do not have direct sight lines between, all of the holes in the golf shop or from certain vantage points, just based on how they meander through the coastal areas and as well as the woodlands. And so the use of that technology has certainly allowed us to keep an eye from a bird's eye view, see where some of the backups may be taking place, and then respond more efficiently with our ranger team and our ranger supervisors to get to those groups that may need a little bit of assistance.
Fantastic. So let me just jump ahead. Here's some illustrations of how that normally looks like. So your ranger would also have a tablet, and they've got the system information on there. Then you've got in the back office that you might be looking at, or some of your pro shop staff. So there's that sense of line of sight, and which I'm sure is very reassuring. And maybe just talk for a minute. How does your starter interact with the players and introduce Tag Marshal to them, and also how it's going to add value to their round, and maybe also how the caddies responded to the program? Because from Eastlake, for instance, we know that the caddies were initially hesitant because it's human to maybe not want to be tracked and monitored, but they very quickly realized, well, this is good for my round that I'm going to provide. It gets me off the course a little bit quicker. Time is money. And ultimately, if there's a great flow and I've provided a great experience and the system helps me do that, that means a good tip for me as well as a caddy. So it's something that they've bought into. So yeah, just quickly give us the rundown of the starters and how you engage with the system and the line of sight it provides to you.
Sure. I think every starter is going to, try to provide the starting or the Tag Marshal device to one of our caddies to carry. And again, as you have kind of stated, you get a myriad of responses when it comes to that. Certainly in the beginning, there were caddies that felt that we were listening in to their conversations, using the Tag Marshal, which we had to assure them that this is not Big Brother, listening to those conversations. But it's simply a matter of us being able to identify where the group is on the golf course. And again, for our core golfer, that was never an issue. They were excited to see that because, again, they understood then that, there was a consistency of message that pace is very important to us. However, like anything, there's going to be some of those that are dissenting, those that don't necessarily want to be tracked and don't understand what we're doing. And at the same time, we try to assure them that that's not going to be impacting their experience whatsoever, and the best way for us, for them not to see us or to have that as any sort of concern is just to maintain their position with the group that's directly in front of them. And so our starter will have that conversation if need be, but again, it's just one of those that they introduce it, saying that we're able to at least, kind of see where they are on the golf course, and if something looks like it's going to impact their enjoyment of the golf course, something that's occurring in front of them, we are responding to that and proactively addressing those issues so that it does not impact their experience.
That is very nicely put. And I'm going to share quickly a very nice experience that was told to me by Michael Williams, who's a GolfWorks a journalist. And he said, and that's how he got to talking to me. He had a round of golf at Pacific Dunes, and he specifically played as a single, and he said it was the most elating and glorious round of golf he's ever played in his life. That speaks to the design. The day happened to be a fantastic as well, and he was on his own, and he said like his best golf is if he can just not see anybody, not in front of him, not behind him, no one. And then what happened to him was he was happily playing his round, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, appears a Bandon Dunes player assistant and says, "Hey, Mr. Williams, how are you enjoying your round? And you're doing really nicely for pace. I hope the score is up to scratch, and you're having a great time. By the way, you're about to walk onto the other course. You must inform me which one that is, because you've got a very natural minimal signage way of presenting your courses, and he was about to enter another course, and then he was like, how did you know that was going to happen to me, and how did you know where I was at this point in time, and thank you so much for not having me get in the way of somebody else on the other course and play some weird hybrid of that banding experience that I tried and I came here for. The player assistant then showed him, look, this little tag on your bag that's telling me where you are, and then here's a tablet, and that's how I knew. And sometimes this happens, so that's what we're here for. So that was a very fun experience, and he just thought that was the most amazing thing, because it certainly added to his day. At the same time, he didn't have any interactions with anybody else, just really when it mattered. And I think that's also, from what you said earlier, is where the system really helps you.
Well, it doesn't happen often, but we do get that occasionally. As anybody that has played along the coastal regions, when you get that marine layer of fog that comes in, it can be, you can get easily disoriented out on the golf course. And we do have some areas where there's not necessarily a crisscross, but they a couple holes, team grounds will parallel each other, and it's very easy for somebody that because of the minimalization of T signs and markers that way, we try to keep that undisturbed view of the ocean and the environment out there. So there's not T markers that identify hole number 5 and 6 or something like that. So having either a good caddy or having a yardage book, or just again the familiarity of being able to follow some of the walking paths, that's pretty critical. But it is kind of funny to hear that experience and know that Tag Marshall saved him from trying to play maybe 7 holes on Bandon Dunes and then the rest of his round on Pacific Dunes.
Yeah, he might still be out there. I'm kidding. Okay, Steve, let's move on. So just in terms of line of sight, I think you've spoken to that. One of the things that's maybe worth pointing out is that we don't just show where playing groups are, but we also make sense of their relative position and the trends and the risk that they pose to the field, so that you can see, okay, this group is now out of position, but they are not impacting anyone else yet, but this group is out of position and they are impacting groups behind them. So that is where you then prioritize and start to try and assist. Have you found that your team is finding that easy to work with and trusting that information?
Yeah, I think there's certainly been a transition from the way that we used to do it, and the Ranger team out there wanting to feel like they've got to be in all places at all times, and really trying to identify where those bottlenecks might be, to where we can be a little bit more efficient. And again, looking at the trends, looking at where maybe a slowdown is taking place, then we can send a Ranger to those specific spots. I think one of the things that we've even discussed and that we're going to certainly pursue with Tag Marshall is that we would even like to tag our Ranger team that's and identify where they are, so that we can be even more efficient. And when there is a situation on one of the courses, if we're sharing a Ranger between courses, we can then send the Ranger that's closest to that situation and send them to that area and have them provide the assistance on a more efficient basis for us.
Absolutely. Let's quickly jump into the data, because obviously we're providing the live line of sight and the live management functions, but also there's a lot of data that gets collected and documented, like you mentioned earlier, automatically with every single round on every single hole, and multiple play zones within a hole, and obviously every single tee time over time. So this is an example of a 2-week period in April, and so what do you make of this? What can you see here?
Well, this is easily where I spend the majority of my time from an overview perspective. I'll pull Tag Marshall up on each of our golf courses each and every morning. I can look and see where the pace is going, but again, this is where I spend most of my time, is looking at the past data, either on a daily basis or on a monthly basis, and kind of looking to see if there's any trends that are taking place. Again, the dashboard, I think, is extremely easy to read. It gives us the key data that we're looking for. Our team is getting much better, putting the notes onto Tag Marshall, so that there's an identification there of when they have had conversations with groups that may need a little bit more assistance, versus writing it down on their paper tee sheet and then I not having access to be able to view that. So again, this shows us very quickly how are we doing from a starter efficiency standpoint? Are we getting the groups out there on time? How are they doing out there on the golf course as far as our expected pace distributions? And then more importantly, the big one for us is again really reporting that end of month activity, and where did we stand from a position of getting golfers out there, and were there anything that was unusual about the day that would have impacted certain days of that month, whether that is weather or tournament activity or something else. So, and maybe it's just a large group that is
Yes.
giving us some issues. But again, I use this information extensively to where then we even start looking at some of our groups and making notes for the as far as any conversations that we might have to have if we've got a group that is repeat business, and yet they want to be in that pace setter times, or at least in that first morning tee times, but they consistently provide us with a 4:45 pace. That's where then I'll have those discussions to try to encourage them that we would need to see a little bit more efficiency out of them on the golf course, where we would like to put them into a position where maybe they don't feel like they're being pushed, and it would be more enjoyable for their group to play at a later time.
Very nice. So here we see the day performance over that time frame. So each and every day looks at how did the day perform versus your goal time. And overall, you came in at 4:18 where you want to play at 4:20. So that's perfectly in line. Then down here is how your holes have performed. They're also very close to where you want them. And you mentioned the pace distribution. So this is a proprietary measure that we use with TagMarshal. It's not good enough to look just at the average, because Stephen, as you know, the average hides the faster rounds, the twosomes hide the slow ones, and you really want to look at the full spread. And you mentioned earlier that in the past, maybe there was some a bias in influencing the data if you do it manually, because obviously nobody wants to be poor performing, so it's easy to round up or down to help it along a bit. But here what you're looking at is how many of these groups are on pace within 10 minutes and so on, and that gives you a really good measure. So this is a single day, and that's what it looks like. So in the single day view, you're now seeing each tee time, and you mentioned that this blue line is your dynamic goal time that you're running in the morning. That's a bit quicker, so that runs and pulls the day along, as you've said. So you've got a bit more strict of a timing, and then later on from about 9 o'clock, that goes up by about 20 minutes. And there's other clubs, I know Sean Smith from Pebble Beach, they've got a 50-minute spread. So where they're starting their day at 4, and then they're staggering it even further, because the late rounds then play at 4:50, and then also there's communication around that, much in line with what you're doing. So this is, and I'm mindful of our own pace here, Stephen. So, so that is your single day coming in at 4:14, and you're holding yourselves to really high standards here. But you can see that there was an interaction logged with this group that's pink. So this group is impacting 2 others, and one would have hoped that interaction had an impact and ensure that these groups behind that are now coming through on pace, which is what you want. And it's very nice to see that actually saving the day later on, where these groups are also coming in very smoothly. So great to get your feedback on that. Just to quickly conclude on the system side, we do obviously do geofencing and a whole lot of other features. Geofencing becomes very relevant in the cart space, but in your particular a setup where you don't have cards, but you still want control of where people are going, where they're not going. One of the things of having chosen the classic TagMarshal system, where you've got a tag that's clipped onto a golf bag, it's obviously easy to track and monitor your caddies, and they'll come back and they know the drill. But if you've got a player and it's maybe a first time, and they've they decide to carry their own bag, you want to make sure that that little tag that is so unobtrusive doesn't go walkabouts. So in that case, you would have some geofences set up that are sort of risk areas where somebody might leave the course, and that then sends you a notification. Is that something that's set up for you, right?
It is, and again, I think that's been one of the great aspects of this whole program is that you certainly have guest service agents, you have others that are out there and interacting with the guest, but more importantly, when it comes to the tag collection for most of our properties, that is either the caddy delivering the tag, or it's us having one of our golf staff be outside and collect the tag. And what that's done is it gives us, again, really that final touch point that we want from an on-course experience, and that is having somebody that is from the golf team have the opportunity to greet each guest as they come off the golf course and basically check in to see how their day was. And again, whether that gives us an opportunity for service recovery or acknowledge that they had an incredible round and they'd like to share that, that gives us that additional touch point to be able to do that. And so those geofences and the tag collection has been very powerful for that.
Fantastic. So there's two more aspects that we want to look into. And one is some industry efficiencies, insights. And if you just humor me going back to that event in Tokyo that I mentioned earlier. So the USGA has done some extensive research that they mandated the professors Christina Skunova and Eric Gray from the University of Wisconsin to defining the golfer experience. And you'll be happy to hear, Stephen, that a lot of the things that you're focusing on and are doing really well come out as extremely important in that research. And so in line with what I said earlier, we need to understand what it is that defines the golfer experience if we want to improve it. So these two researchers set off to really understand that space, and they did 15,000 surveys, and they tracked a live play of individual players using Tag Marshal on 6 clubs in various climate zones and various times of year. And it's really the most phenomenal and well thought through research project. So they've come back and defined 1,000 touch points, and you mentioned touch points earlier, in the golfer experience. And how that ranks is from engage, that is where shall we go and play, let's go play around, to arrive at the club, playing the round of golf, and exit includes check-in at the pro shop after food and beverage, grab a burger, whatever the case might be, and then obviously extend. And the extend means Bandon might then reach out and say, thank you so much for staying with us, and we hope to welcome you back soon. And by the way, we've got X and Y special if you want to come back sooner than the next season. So that is your extend period, and then it starts again with engage. Where should we play next round? So they have ranked all of these touch points, 1,000 of them, into classifications from perfect frustrator. So this really frustrates me as a customer, and to perfect delighter. And that is how you live your life as a consumer daily, when you go to a restaurant, when you go to a shopping center, when you do online shopping, whatever. There are things that frustrate you and there are things that delight you. And the round of golf can be classified in that way. So how we would suggest this illustration be adjusted is to make the golf part of it bigger, because that is the key reason this whole thing happens. And also it is the majority of time that gets spent. So it's most important that we do whatever happens out on the golf course as well as we can. And that is something that you mentioned earlier, Stephen, that is the reason why people come to Bandon, and that is what you're trying to present in the best possible way. And if we now think about what are the things that frustrate and delight people along this journey, what's really interesting out of these 1,000 touch points, what's come out tops, absolute tops with the overall highest score is positive ranger etiquette. And the reason for that is because it's so unexpected. And the simple matter of traditional rangering and marshalling is that is a policing role. Somebody's out there looking for gaps in the field, looking for issues, approaching players and saying, hey guys, you're slow, get on with it. And that is something that players really don't like. They don't like that engagement. They don't want to be called slow. And obviously you have identified that, and you've now got a very different way of going about it that's much more positive. And even mentioning that you would have, or your team would have, an early interaction with the player, from starting with the starter, knowing, understanding and creating that awareness, and then on the third tee there is an interaction with your on-course staff that happens regardless of the pace. and more likely than not, somebody is well on track and on pace, and it would be a positive experience. That is a tick in that Ranger box. Then you mentioned green open tees, that there's no wait times out there, overall playing speed. Those are all really highly ranked. Also, beer angels and drinks cards are highly ranked. Players really love that, and obviously conditioning is important. But then on the flip side, ranger and marshalling role in general, and that is the traditional role, is really poorly ranked. The placement is poorly ranked. And why do players point that out? That's because they don't believe that role is effective. And there's a huge conundrum in that. We actually saw some other research the other day where there were junior players asked, and they said 84% of them said, yeah, pace is really an issue in the golf that we play and the tournament space that we're in. But only 3% of them said, well, I might be part of that issue. So I might be slow or holding up others, but and that is obviously a huge disconnect. So the ranger and marshal role, if there is no data and it's opinion based, is really, really, really hard to get right. And at the speed at the same time is super negative and frustrating if the speed of the flow isn't good. And that is obviously a problem now, because the golfers demand that you do it well, but they don't allow you to do it well in the traditional way. So something needs to change, and corrective pace actions is something they hate. And that is something that you have all ticked off now and doing really elegantly, because you've got data, you've got information, and you've got a process that does that well. And it would certainly show in the overall Bandon experience as well. We are a bit stretched for time because of our repeat of the first hole earlier. So let me just quickly jump ahead on this insight where we are talking about dynamic goal times. That's something that you deploy at Bandon, basically staggering the day and not having a flat one size fits all time allocation, but starting the day quicker and pulling the day along. And then this is what that looks like at this course. That's a single day with about 200 players out. And we just want to show the effectiveness of this. So this is that distribution chart that shows how many rounds are on pace within 10 minutes, 20, 30, 40, 50, 50 minutes over. So that doesn't mean that all of these players are slow, but that means that their round ended up at that pace because they were impacted by others. And this is a day early on in the system usage, where the club and the team are just getting used to things, and they're basically for the first time really tracking what's happening out there without the bias up or down rounding that we might do. And a year later, having deployed the system well, some of the strategies that our team recommends, obviously also digging into the data, that is the result. So 1 year later, on a similar day, similar weather, same amount of players, we have adjusted our playtime from 434 to 407, which is a huge benefit to all these players because they're now all coming through on pace. It's really well balanced, and there's hardly any bad or slow rounds. So that is a fantastic experience that this club has now provided on the day. But what it also means, and I'd like to get your opinion on that now, Stephen, is that we have freed up 27 minutes on average for this 200 players. And that effectively means 90 hours that these individuals can spend in the food and beverage setup, in the pro shop, and other revenue generating assets of the facility. And obviously there's a net promoter score that is really high, meaning these people are saying, I loved it. I really had a great time. And of course I'll come back, but there was no frustration, because these colors over here mean frustration to the players. And the research obviously shows how that then impacts what they take away from the experience. So what I wanted to quickly look at with you, Stephen, is obviously the traditional way meant more manpower out there looking for problems, and now you can do that with less. And you mentioned the bell curve earlier, where you can then really see what are the crunch times of day that we need to keep an eye. This is just a generic example, but what has it taught you also from your time of year, daylight hours? How do you apply your staffing, and has there been a benefit in having less staffing hours out there to do this and to do this well? And obviously, you mentioned as much you feel like you're getting better results than you did in the past.
No question. I think that we've looked at it, and when we look at how our bell curve shapes out directly, we would often in I guess the old days or the former days, we would have 4 rangers per golf course, and to where we've been able to make that more efficient by just having essentially 2 rangers a day on the golf course, plus a supervisor overlooking 2 golf courses, him or herself. And really what that came down to was having a very direct period of time where we need to pay attention to, and for us that was in that say 10 o'clock to 11:30 time frame was where we really needed to have a stronger presence on the golf course as far as making sure that those groups are staying on our hopeful pace of for the first part of the round, to where then the things would tend to flow a little bit more evenly throughout the day. But it would allowed us to kind of reduce that footprint later in the day as well, which was kind of nice. So instead of having people out there primarily just in a policing role, it allowed us to be a little bit more efficient that way. Have some cost savings from a starter ranger team, and as we all know, labor is easily probably the greatest factor of an expense outside of course maintenance.
Sure. Stephen, thanks for that insight. Just to quickly summarize, from your point of view, the impact on revenue and savings that you can see that getting those efficiencies and managing this as well as you possibly can, and obviously also tracking benchmarking performance is having on Bandon Dunes.
Well, again, it's one of those things that just like any caddy will tell you, that they would desire to be out on the golf course the least amount of time as possible, because that affects their dollar per hour essentially. From our standpoint, we're trying to create that overall guest experience and being efficient out on the golf course. But if we're able to do that, then that provides additional revenue generating opportunities for us, whether that is a second round out on the golf course, or whether that is somebody that does not necessarily want to go out and play another 18-hole round. It's providing them additional amenities on the resort that can produce revenue generating opportunities. So we're very fortunate where we have a 13-hole par 3 golf course that is treated just like any one of the other golf courses. It has its own turn stand and things out there, so we get additional revenue from maybe a shortened executive round of golf, plus the food and beverage that goes along with that. We also have our 2-acre putting complex called the Punch Bowl that we have guests will head over to and play that for hours on end, and there's food and beverage that's attached to that facility. So by us having the opportunity to create an efficient round of golf, provide them with food and beverage opportunities or additional golf opportunities, that's just again giving them a better experience and driving our revenue bottom line that assists us even better.
Brilliant. So from an overall experience rating point of view, I'm sure that's something that you're very mindful of, and you have got a phenomenally high return rate. Would you say that there's an impact in, there might be other resorts that are loading the course, and while that is a good idea today, when it comes to repeat play, people might think twice because sure, they've played it, but it hasn't been so great. So is that something where you're seeing an impact that your return rates, your loyalty, your customer loyalty, and also your customers referring others to come and play is positive?
Absolutely. I think that, again, our golf courses and the environment speaks for itself here, but if we're not providing, the expectations once they're on site, and that comes from, do we have, golf courses that are delivering that experience? Do we have the service that's delivering that experience? As well as, the timing that they spend on the golf course. If we're not delivering that experience as well, it all goes into their overall expectation and satisfaction. And we think that's because of the, myriad of these topics all blending together that we have been blessed to have, I guess the loyal clientele that we refer to as Bandonistas, returning on an annual basis to be a part of our facility. So it's all of those things combined, providing that overall experience, and pace is certainly, a big part of that.
Thanks, Stephen. We know that there's a number of other operators that are then starting to actively look for opportunities to add capacity to their tee sheet because they realize, hey, I can actually guarantee my round to be played at 410, and there's no risk of it going over, so I can add time, and others are getting quite fancy with the help of the data that's available, and that is something that makes logical sense just from a physics point of view. If your early rounds are moving more quickly and you can control that, then there's opportunity to actually reduce the interval because the time that players are moving within a certain amount of minutes, or rather the distance, is higher. So then some operators are getting quite fancy in looking for optimization for their T sheet, and that obviously means while I'm providing a great experience and I can guarantee that there's a great flow, I can now add a capacity, and obviously that means more legs on the course and at the resort and at the food and beverage. So that is something that can be explored as well, and obviously highly attractive from a revenue point of view too. So Stephen, thank you so much for your time. There have been a number of questions asked that we actually got to. For instance, what have you been able to identify course setup opportunities using a technology? What's one of them that has come through? And maybe we can just pick up on that. What are your key data points? We spoke about those. How did the caddies respond to the system? We spoke about those. So maybe just one, have you identified setup opportunities using the technology, or anything that has either confirmed or maybe countered any assumptions that you may have had around your course setup?
As far as the course setup and using the tag Marshall, is that the question, Bodo?
And not just the general course setup in terms of, like you mentioned, you're looking at the hole by hole performance, but if there's a hole that's really not performing well or creates a choke point, is that something that you would potentially consider or may have considered setup adjustments, for instance?
Sure. You know, I guess ironically for us, where we notice the biggest difference in how we set up our golf courses, and our superintendents have got to be very proficient at this on each one of their golf courses. But the biggest factor there for us is going to be the weather. Again, as we change seasonally during the summer months, that wind will come out of the north, and the wintertime it comes out of the south. And so the golf courses can play completely different based on the time of year and what's going on with that weather. So the superintendents are certainly looking at what is the weather factor, and based on some very specific holes. There's no question Tag Marshall showed us on certain holes, as well as then hole locations on the greens. Based on the weather, you know, they needed to make adjustments, and they've been making those adjustments. And again, the data of using Tag Marshall showed us on particular weather days and particular hole location zones, you know, certain holes played either much easier or much more challenging. And so we've been able to make some of those adjustments and modify the course setup, you know, based on that data.
Excellent. That's a great answer and explanation. Thank you. Are there any more questions from the audience? You can shout quickly. And thank you so much for your time, everyone who joined. Stephen, thank you so much for your time and the great insight that you've provided. It's really been a pleasure. There's one more question popping in. Let me just check here. No other questions. That was the question. Thanks. So Natalie has been keeping tabs. Stephen, thanks so much. Are you planning to head down to the PGA show at all? That we maybe meet in person and grab a dinner or something?
I am certainly hoping to, Bodo. I mean, that's the goal right now. So if I do, I'll certainly let you know. But I would look forward to it. Oh,
fantastic! Great. No, I look forward to meeting in person. And thank you so much for taking the time and also preparing for this. I know that you're busy, and there's no golf days at Bandon. It's always there's always more, and there's always more to do. And even in winter now, you're still very busy, but with shorter days, like you mentioned. So have a fantastic rest of the year, and then I hope that we'll get to see each other at the PGA Show in Orlando end of January.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate the day.
Thank you so much. All the best.
All right, bye-bye.